Good day. In this video, we'll be dealing with additional medical expenses tax credit, and this is in terms of Section 6B. We will be looking at an example of how this concept or the principles in Section 6B are applied. Right. So if we look at example 1, you have Mr. Smith, who is a 35-year-old taxpayer and is the sole member of his medical scheme, to which he contributes an amount of $5,000 per month. Mr. Smith has a taxable income of $350,000 and he paid for qualifying medical expenses of $10,000, which were not reimbursed by his medical aid during the current year of assessment. What we are required to do is to calculate Mr. Smith's Section 6B rebate, so the additional medical expenses tax credit. Right, so what we will start off, if we need to calculate, so before we start with the calculation, what is important from this example in terms of calculating Section 6B? You look at the age of the taxpayer, right? That is the most important thing. So we are dealing with a taxpayer here who is younger than 65 years. Mr. Smith is 35, so we will need to make a note of that. So if a taxpayer is younger than 65, this is how you would calculate their Section 6B rebates. You will look at the medical contributions, and where do we get that? We have been given that information that the taxpayer makes a contribution of $5,000 per month, right? So that's why we take that 5,000 and multiply it by 12. We get to an amount of 60,000, right? And then you less 4 times the Section 6A credit. So this, remember, is an example of Section 6B. So if you were looking at what are the Section 6A credits of this taxpayer, we will look at whether this taxpayer is a sole member of the medical aid or not. So we have been given that information that Mr. Smith is the only person belonging to their medical scheme, and as a result, it means they will get medical tax credits of $332 per month. So to get to the 6A credits, you will multiply that by 12 months because he contributed towards the medical aid for the entire year of assessment, right? So for purposes of Section 6B, you will take those 6A credits and multiply them by 4, and 4, the reason why we multiply by 4 is because the taxpayer is younger than 35 and they do not have a disability as well, right? So for you to look at whether the taxpayer, or for you to reason that the taxpayer might have a disability, that needs to be clearly stated in the scenario that you are given. So if nothing is being said, or if the question is silent on whether the taxpayer has a disability or not, then you assume that the taxpayer does not have a disability unless that is clearly stated. Right, so the 332 multiplied by 12 multiplied by 4 will give you an amount of 15,936. So the excess of that is that 44,064. Right, and then to that excess of 44,064, we need to add an amount of 10,000. Where does this 10,000 come from? That is your qualifying medical expenditure that was not recovered from the medical aid by the taxpayer. The sum of these two amounts will give you an amount of 54,064, and then to get to the next calculation, or to get to the next part of our calculation, the other important thing in terms of calculating 6B credits for a taxpayer that is younger than 65 is their taxable income. So you will need to take 7.5% of taxable income. And where do we get the taxable income? We get it over here. We are given that amount, that the taxable income of the taxpayer is 350,000, right? So you take the 7.5% of the taxable income. That is where we get this amount of 26,250. Right, and then once we take that amount of 26,250, less it from the 54,064, we get to an amount of 27,814. Right, and then the last step for us to calculate the 6B credit would be to take this excess and then multiply it by 25%. So that 27,814 multiplied by 25% is 6,954. So let's do a quick recap of what needs to be done where you're dealing with a taxpayer that is younger than 35 and they do not have a disability in terms of Section 6B rebates. You firstly need to look at the medical contributions that were made. Remember, if the taxpayer's employer made contributions on behalf of the taxpayer, then you will need to add those contributions here as well, because they will be deemed to have been made by the taxpayer as well, right? And then you less 4 times. So let me just perhaps highlight the most important things. So it will be 4 times the 6A credits. You less that from the contributions. You get to an amount of 44,064, right? And then the next step would be to add your qualifying medical expenditure that will be given in the question, right? That is that 10,000 over there, right? And then the sum of that amount would be the 54,064, and from that you will need to less 7.5% of the taxable income. So that's the other important step in making or calculating your Section 6B rebates. The next thing then, or the last step, would be to take the excess of what you have calculated here, that's 27,814, and multiply it by 25%. So these are the steps that you need or you should use when calculating the 6B rebate for a taxpayer that is younger than 35 and does not have a disability. And then for this example, we would look at a taxpayer who is 65 or older, right? So how do we calculate Section 6B rebates for a taxpayer that is 65 or older, right? So this is how we would do it. Well, firstly, let's look at the details of the example. So you have Mr. Smith, a 65-year-old taxpayer, is the sole member of his medical aid, similar to example 1, but this time the change comes with the age, right? So this is the difference here. Sorry about that. So that is the change to our example. Everything else remains the same. Mr. Smith is the sole member of the medical aid and he makes a contribution of 5,000 per month. He has a taxable income of 350 and he paid for qualifying medical expenses of 10,000, which were not reimbursed by his medical aid during the current year of assessment, right? So if we look at then what needs to be done, or if we need to calculate Mr. Smith's Section 6B rebates, we would look at the following steps. So it's different from when you're dealing with a taxpayer that is younger than 65. Right. So you will have the medical contributions, that is that 5,000 times 12. So that is the contribution towards the scheme of 5,000 rand made by Mr. Smith for 12 months, and you get to that amount of 60,000, similar to the previous example. Right, and then less 3 times Section 6A credits. If you refer to the example that we did, your example 1, the difference between that example and this example, meaning the difference between when a taxpayer is younger than 65 and when they are 65 or older, is instead of 4 times the 6A credits, you multiply by 3 times the 6A credits. So it's still the 332 multiplied by 12 times 3 instead of 4, right? You get to an amount of 11,952, and then the difference between those two amounts, meaning the excess of the contributions, is 48,048 rates, right? And then you add your qualifying medical expenditure, which is similar to the previous example of 10,000. And then remember what we did with example 1, because the taxpayer was younger than 65, before we came to this last step, what we did is we had to look at the taxable income of the taxpayer. Now, because this taxpayer is older than or is 65, then that step of 7.5% of the 350 is not applicable where you are dealing with a taxpayer that is 65 or older, right? So that step, you scratch it out. What you do instead is you take the excess of the contributions plus the qualifying medical expenditures of 10,000, and then you multiply that by 33.3%, right? So this amount of 33.3% times the excess and the qualifying medical expenditure will give you the 6B credit of 19,330. Okay. Quick recap like we did with example 1. You look at the contributions, so that's the first step. So the important thing with regards to this example is the age of the taxpayer. So the first step, look at medical contributions for the year of assessment. Multiply those by, multiply the 6A credits by 3, and then add your qualifying medical expenditure, and then lastly, multiply the excess by 33.3%. And that brings me to the end of this video. I hope it was useful. Thank you.